Cannibalism is one of the ultimate human taboos, and rumors of cannibalism are far more prevalent than actual proven cases. Here are a few true stories.
Hey, wasn't it around here that the Donner Party got snowbound?
I think that was farther west in the Sierras.
What was the Donner Party?
Let's get this one out of the way. The Donner Party story is true. In November of 1846, the ill-fated expedition found itself snowbound in the mountains between California and Nevada. Very quickly, they ate the pack animals. Then after that, the dogs. And then, in a desperate attempt to survive, they boiled the animal bones and hides. That doesn't provide the proper nutrients, though, and so by Christmas, the Donner Party began to eat their dead. Very quickly, rumors and accusations of murder abounded, the idea being that the murderers wanted to keep fresh flesh close at hand. The very next year, in February of 1847, Alfred Packer and 5 other prospectors headed out in search of gold in Colorado's Breckenridge Mountains. A few months later, Packer stumbled into a camp with a tale that his 5 fellow prospectors had all died in search of food. Later on, he admitted that 1 man had died and the rest of the group had eaten him. 3 had died of exposure, and 1 man Packer had killed in self-defense. When the weather cleared and authorities found the camp in August, they quickly discovered that Packer had murdered his 5 fellow prospectors and eaten them. During the nearly 3-year Nazi siege of Leningrad in World War II, nearly 1 million people died. The city was cut off from supplying itself with food, and gangs of hungry citizens roamed the streets. Anxious parents kept their children from going out at night, and the city had to create a unit dedicated with combating cannibalism. Ultimately, 260 Leningrad citizens were charged with the crime during the siege. In 2008, a group of 33 Dominicans set out in a fishing boat for Puerto Rico in search of a better life. Less than 2 days out, however, the engines malfunctioned and the boat was set adrift. After drifting in open waters for 6 more days, the first person died. After that, the captain disappeared. After 2 more weeks, 27 of the original 33 people died of dehydration or starvation. Finally, driven to the brink, the last remaining 5 survivors ate the body of the most recently deceased. Ironically, the Coast Guard found the boat the next day. These are just a few true stories of survival cannibalism. For even more of these grisly tales, go to howstuffworks.com and read 10 true stories of survival cannibalism. And don't forget to subscribe to our videos while you're here.
In 1859, miners uncovered gold along the Blue River in Breckenridge, Colorado. News spread, and Breckenridge became the hotspot for a gold rush, attracting hundreds of miners per year. Among these explorers was Alfred Packer, a guide to 21 comrades on their way to a better future. Born in 1842, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, Packer served the Union Army twice during the Civil War, but was discharged both times due to epilepsy. His journey started in Provo, Utah, November 1874, where he met his 21 companions and started the journey to cross the San Juan Mountains to the town of Gunnison. On January 21, 1874, Packer was advised by a Native American chief named Ouray at a camp near Montrose, Colorado, to stay put at least until the expected snowstorm passed. A hard-headed Packer decided to continue the journey to the mountains, and with him came 5 other men. There were 6 in total. Alfred Packer, James Humphrey, Shannon Bell, George California Noon, Israel Swan, and Frank Reddy Miller. On April 16, 1874, Packer arrived at the Los Pinos Indian Agency near Gunnison, Colorado alone and with quite a grim tale to tell. It was told that at an unknown date, the group became hopelessly snowbound and soon began running out of provisions. In the dead of winter, food was scarce, and since Packer was the guide, he left camp to look for any food he could find. He arrived back to camp to find a crazed Shannon Bell surrounded by 4 badly mutilated cadavers and kneeling over a 5th one. In a frantic daze, Bell ran towards Packer with a hatchet, but Packer was faster to yield his revolver and shoot Bell in the hip. Surrounded by 5 bodies, Packer's search for food continued no longer. He ate whom he claimed Bell had killed for the remaining months of his artist's journey and left camp as soon as the weather permitted. However, recent analysis of skeletal material and the employment of techniques used by forensic anthropologists shows a much less heroic attempt to save one's life.
Forensic anthropology can help disprove the myth by looking at the skeletal evidence and whether or not it's consistent with the story that is being told.
In 2001, archaeologists took a soil sample from under Shannon Bell's skeletal remains and retrieved traces of lead consistent with the bullets Packer's gun contained. According to the tale, Packer shot Bell in the hip.
It is possible that if somebody was shot with a lead bullet, that with time, with leaching, the lead bullet would contaminate the soil underneath the individual. It would also be very useful. There could be bullet rub, and lead would actually be left on the pelvis itself. So you would need to look at the pelvis with an X-ray and see if there's any lead still there. So theoretically, it could contaminate the soil underneath.
However, in the 18th century, lead was a commonly used material in the making of cheap fashion accessories.
It's normally, belt buckles, sometimes belt buckles, they're really cheap ones. They're made out of lead or pewter. And I mean really cheap. And I'm not sure how well appointed these guys were. It's not like they were dressed up for, going out to a dance or something. They were just cutting through the mountains. That might explain it. Again, that would be directly below the pelvis too. Yeah.
It is also known that Packer's victims were not buried until August of the same year, leaving them exposed to the weather and carnivores for the 4-month period. 3 of the other individuals, as well as Bell, were found to possess round circular puncture wounds to the iliac bones of the pelvis, consistent with bullets, but also with bare scavenging marks.
Given the amount of time that's gone on between the event and the current analysis, it might be difficult to distinguish between bullet holes in the pelvis and scavenging marks resulting from bare scavenging. Broadly, they have the same general shape, they'd be circular and round, but it might be difficult to distinguish between the two.
Is it really logical that Packer shot 4 of the individuals in the pelvis? Or is it possible that a hungry bear came about and ate one of the body parts Packer certainly did not fillet for consumption? The frontal pubic region.
Given that the 4 total individuals had the same round hole in their pelvis, it seems odd that Packer would shoot everybody in the hips.
I think that the only way to really solve the problem would be to take a microscope and take a look at the pelvises of all 5 or 6 of them and compare them and look for, you can even probably do a trace element analysis on the edge of the impact fracture on the pelvis going in and going out, and then compare them. And that might actually solve the problem, or I should say the mystery, if that's what you guys are calling it.
This information does not necessarily take away the smoking gun from Packer's hand. The lead traces, a wallet with a circular hole that belonged to Bell, and Packer's revolver all support Packer's version of the story. However, the skeletons give us a chilling alternative. Several experts, when analyzing the skeletal remains of the victims, observed several different types of lesions to the bone. They consisted of hacking traumas, depressed fractures, butchering marks, butterfly fractures, and blunt force traumas throughout the body, being that depressed fractures and blunt force traumas were present only on the cranium.
The main difference you would see between a hacking type wound or something more akin to a butchering mark would be simply the size of the striation, the actual cut in the bone. A hacking mark would be much more violent and it would cause fractures to radiate from the point of impact. Smaller, sharp trauma wounds like butchering would be much finer and wouldn't be quite as deep. Depressed fractures generally result from a large surface impacting a bone, like a baseball bat to the head results in a different type of trauma than an axe to the head, and it would be diagnostically different.
Although post-mortem butchering marks were dominant throughout the body, Unique characteristics of perimortem traumas were easily identifiable due to their revealing locations. Hacking wounds to the forearms of 3 of the individuals, including Bell, suggest that they defended themselves at the time of the attack and were eventually killed by fatal wounds to the head. However, 2 of the individuals show no such marks on their forearm, suggesting they were viciously murdered in their sleep.
Finding axe marks, or theoretical axe marks, to the back of the head or on the front of the head on the left-hand side is consistent with a right-handed individual striking somebody downward and from the right. So such marks would be consistent with the theory that hackers attacked a couple individuals in their sleep.
Although no one will ever know what drove those men to kill one another, it is possible that it all came about as a great act of desperation when face to face with starvation. Cannibalism in Western civilization, differently than indigenous cultures, happens mostly in extreme situations.
The most common occurrences are, again, those rare situations where you have people that are stranded somewhere that actually have to resort to survival cannibalism. And I guess you see more commonly on TV, you would actually see situations where people are engaged in some kind of cannibalism for sadomsexual pursuits, for some kind of aspect of their lives or control or something like that, that they actually have to use to kind of control people. There's a really huge difference there.
At an unknown date, Packer could have awoken to find one of the individuals eating in secrecy what little provisions they had left. After an argument involving all of them, Packer quietly waited for his comrades to sleep. In the midst of a cold winter night, Packer arose in silence and brutally murdered 2 individuals in their sleep. Cut marks on the forearms of 3 of the other victims suggest that for these kills, Packer had to fight the other man's natural instinct to live. Their attempts were futile. One by one, he murdered them all. Immediately after killing 5 of his companions, and before the bodies could stiffen, Packer began to systematically fillet the freshly butchered meat.
What do you know about the human meat consumption?
I've never tasted it myself, but when you get a burn victim, it smells a lot like barbecue.
Later, a storm drives Chase's boat from the other 2.
Neither of the others were to be seen. In vain did we look over every part of the ocean for our companions. They were gone. Owen Chase, first mate.
The lifeline of comradeship gone, death seems inevitable. Only 8 days later, on Chase's boat, the eldest crewman is ready to die.
Very frequently people will just say, okay, I've had enough of this, now I'm going to die. They're not in noticeably worse shape than they were the day before, but their will to live has just given out. And they lie down and wrap themselves in a piece of cloth if they have one and turn their face to the wall, and that's the end.
We committed his remains to the deep, breathing his requiem in silence. Thomas Nickerson, cabin boy.
Now, provisions are nearly gone. With no other boats to depend on, Chase faces a horrible prospect: starving to death or eating the next man to die.
all sailors, Melville included, would know that cannibalism was, in some sense, a part of a sailor's life. That is to say, all sailors knew that at the end of the day, if things came to it, cannibalism might be the only way to survive.
On Pollard's boat, 300 miles away, another crewman dies. The death forces Pollard to face the same decision as Chase.
Basically, human beings are meat. If you've been starved long enough, when you're suddenly confronted with the possibility that here is, 120 pounds of meat or 100 pounds of meat, the thought of eating it must not be very far behind.
They eat the heart, liver, and kidneys raw, then try to sear the 30 pounds of sinewy flesh the corpse provides. After more than 2 months at sea, Pollard's boat drifts away in the darkness. Now, all 3 boats sail alone toward further human horrors. Day 78. On Chase's boat, a crewman is on the brink of madness and death.
He lay in the greatest pain and apparent misery, groaning piteously until he died in the most horrid convulsions I have ever witnessed.
Again, Owen Chase must choose, consume the dead or die within days.
We separated his limbs from his body and cut all the flesh from his bones. In this manner did we dispose of our fellow sufferer. Humanity must shudder at the dreadful recital. I have no language to paint the anguish of our souls.
Chase's narrative could always be considered atheistical in its implications, its suggestion of man abandoned in the universe. There's a strong sense that the sailors have been abandoned by God, that the very fact that they have to turn to cannibalism is the sign that they are alone in the world. And the very image of men eating other men, of turning to cannibalism, suggests, in a sense, that all order has been taken out of the world.
Less than 100 miles north, Captain Pollard faces the ultimate human abhorrence. "16-year-old Charles Ramsdell suggests that one be executed to sustain the others.
No.
Pollard refuses.
But if I die first, you're all welcome to subsist on my remains.
Captain.
But Owen Coffin, his own cousin, supports the idea.
I think the psychological difference between eating somebody who has died of natural causes, sort of, and killing somebody is a very big one. I think it's a big psychological step, especially one of the people that has suffered with you, worked with you, been with you from Nantucket on to the whaling situation, to the shipwreck, in the boats, and so on, and sort of cold-bloodedly killing him so that you can eat him. I think that's a very major psychological threshold to cross.
The lots are drawn. Young Owen Coffin is the loser.
I'll shoot the first man who touches you.
I like it as well as any other.
Coffin accepts his fate and prepares to die. Again, they draw lots. This time for executioner. Charles Ramsdell must kill his boyhood friend. Chase, Lawrence, and Nickerson have endured nearly 3 months at sea and the horrors of inhumanity. On February 18, 1821, they awakened to a sight they had only dared to dream of. It is the British merchant ship Indian sailing off the coast of Chile. Finally, their ordeal is over. Owen Chase has navigated 2,500 miles of ocean. But Pollard's boat has yet to be found. Five days later, and 400 miles south, the Nantucket whaler Dauphin comes upon a horrendous scene. Pollard and Ramsdell, the only survivors, have been found.
The men were found sucking the bones of their dead mates, which they were loath to part with. Commodore Charles Goodwin Ridgely.
I think by the time that they were rescued, they were probably insane, completely unaware of circumstances around them, unaware of the ship being there, probably unaware of each other. And I'm not even sure they were aware of themselves.
Despite his condition, Pollard has a fierce need to talk, to recount one of the strangest tales of the sea ever told, and to plead that a ship be sent to find the remaining men on the deserted island.
Look, it is the ultimate survival story. In 1972, a plane carrying 45 people crashed in the Andes, sub-zero conditions. 72 days later, 16 of them were found alive.
In order to live, they had done the unimaginable, eaten their dead friends. Now, 4 decades on, reporter Alex Cullen from Seven's Sunday Night has tracked down 3 of the men who made it out.
I just remember the sound of the impact.
Lost the wings, lost the tail.
I was so afraid.
I knew I was going to die.
I'm buried under concrete. I couldn't move.
People dying, people crying, people screaming.
The search is being called off.
Now we were on our own.
This would be their home for 72 days.
No food, no water, no help.
This is a nightmare.
How do you die? Slowly? I just wanted to live.
And Nando told me, Carlitos, I'm going to eat the pilot.
Alpha Golf Golf, proceed.
It's just after sunrise near Santiago, Chile. Our chopper is taking us high into the Andes. Below us, towering 15,000-foot peaks. It's the world's longest mountain range. Very little lives here. Where we're going is hours away.
And that's where we'll see the site of history's greatest survival story.
Alex joins us now. It is an amazing story. They wrote a book, then a movie, How did you track down 3 of them? How hard was that?
Well, they're pretty hard to track down. One of them is a producer now. They've all gone on to lead great, fruitful lives. One's a doctor. One now goes around the world talking about his experience. And we got in contact with Nando Parada, one of the guys you saw there, who was basically the leader of this group. He's now a TV producer. But just watching that brought back so many memories. I mean, especially meeting these guys. Like, you could talk to them for hours and hours. They are so captivating.
So are they happy to talk about it? I've often wondered, because you know when people go through something as traumatic as this, that they just want to shut it out.
Yeah, they do. They talk about it, absolutely, as though it was yesterday.
Gosh.
It's so stuck in their memories. I mean, it's more than 40 years since it happened. Yeah. But what they went through, it is probably the best story I've been involved with in terms of human endurance, survival. It's just absolutely got it all. 72 days, minus 35-degree temperatures. And as you can see, being there, it was, the air is very thin. We're 15,000 feet up. It is like one big giant freezer. And how they stayed and survived after 72 days, it is just an incredible story.
Were they traumatised by it?
Yes.
Are they still?
Yes, very much so. One guy we spoke to, Roberto Canessa, he's now a doctor, and he still gets upset talking about it, and you'll see in our interview on Sunday night, he still gets quite teary talking about the people back at home who were so worried about them, especially his girlfriend at the time and now his wife. And her father was just, he knew that they would get out alive, and he always held out hope, and 72 days later, out they came.
After doing the story,
yeah,
would you have done it? You think about it.
That's the question you've got to ask yourself, isn't it? In that situation, survival is paramount. It's amazing
So you
I probably would, because there was nothing. They had absolutely nothing
If you're
to
faced
eat.
with death, you probably would try, wouldn't you? Something to not die.
Exactly. They were eating the leather off the seats. They were eating the leather off their shoes at one stage. And after the 10th day, Nando said those famous words, "I want to eat the pilot." And that was pretty much what everyone was thinking. And it was either that or death. And they had to do it. They just had to.
Would you?
Yeah, well, I figure they're dead.
Yeah.
You know, you've got something to live for. It's amazing, mate.
It is.
Can't wait for it on Sunday night.
Yeah,
Great
it's
to
a
see you.
Amazing story.
Good to see you guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex.
We'll be landing soon. Everybody, please sit down.
Guys, everybody, please sit down.
Do you think they hear you?
Come on now, sit down. Sit down. Everybody's sitting now. Sit down.
See, I told you, now sit down.
All right, anything to calm your nerves.
Here's what Alonso's doing.
Ladies and gentlemen, put on your parachutes. We're jumping into the Andes Mountains.
Put that down and sit down.
All right, all right.
Put that cigarette out.
Nando, is everything all right?
Everything's fine, Mom. Just an air pocket.
Mom, it scared me too.
Mother of God, no!
Oh, shit!
Come on, run! Come on! What happened?
Are we supposed to fly that close to the mountains?
Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, blessed is thy child.
Power! We need more power! I can't let...
It was Friday the 13th, and perhaps the unluckiest day ever for the Uruguayan rugby team aboard the plane. Everyone on the team had to contribute in order to survive, even the dead. The Uruguayan rugby team were on a charter flight to Santiago, Chile on October 13, 1972. They were on a Fairchild F-227 holding 45 passengers. Most were only 17 to 19 years old. At a cruising speed of about 230 miles per hour, the bottom of the plane struck the mountains at around 12,000 feet, right where the wings attached to the body. First the wings broke away and tumbled down the mountain. Then the plane, now without wings, engines, or a tail, sailed down the mountain slope at an approximate speed of 200 miles per hour for over 400 yards. Suddenly the fuselage came to a halt against a giant snow berm, resulting in a crumpled nose of the plane, and seats and passengers propelled forward, crushing many. After the crash, 33 were alive, although many had suffered gruesome injuries, leaving only 2 passengers completely unharmed. 2 were sucked out of the airplane during the crash. Their bodies were never found. Passengers had suffered from shattered bones, broken legs. 1 passenger had been impaled by a steel tube in the stomach. When it was taken out, several inches of his intestines were ripped out with it. Another had his calf muscle stripped completely off his bone and twisted forward, hanging across his shin. Nando Parado, who became one of the leaders of the group, had fractured his skull severely. Roberto Canessa and Gustavo Zerbino, both medical students, took the role as the doctors for the passengers and began to free people from the seats and tended to the wounds. As nighttime began to fall, the survivors slept in the fuselage, doing all they could to stay alive through the temperatures below minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. By the next morning, 5 more had died on the first night, leaving only 27 survivors. A series of misfortunate events led to the detrimental plane crash in the Andes, but little did the survivors know they would go to great lengths to survive using teamwork, common sense, and quick decision-making. But how does team effort affect survival in the face of a catastrophe? Without a doubt, that we were a group of friends, a team, and culturally and socially of the same level helped, survivor Carlos Paez said. If it had been an airliner, it would have been very complicated. It would have all been people who didn't know each other. Nando Parado agreed and noted, the group worked as a team, and their longtime captain, Marcelo Perez, took control and led the group, and according to Nando, much of the credit for our survival in those critical early days must go to Marcelo. By the second day, Marcelo began to ration their food, which consisted of a few nuts, chocolate bars, dried fruit, jam, 3 bottles of wine, some whiskey, and a few bottles of liqueur found in suitcases. This did not come even close to enough food for 27 people, and Nando recollects that each meal was nothing more than a small square of chocolate or a dab of jam washed down with a sip of wine from the cap of an aerosol can. By the 7th day, their supplies had been exhausted and were completely out of food. In order to survive on the 8th day, they were forced to eat raw human flesh from their dead comrades. After first eating a piece of their dead pilot, Nando reflects that we all knew our fight for survival would be uglier and more harrowing than we had imagined, but I felt that as a group we had made a declaration to the mountain that we would not surrender. Carlos Paez described the human flesh to be sweet and roughly like steak tartare. He also adds that he never felt blame or remorse, as he explained that he believed that the bodies had been detached from their souls, and this was all they could do in order to survive. Along with starvation, the frigid temperatures were also life-threatening, and in order to withstand, they needed to use critical thinking and survival strategies. In order to melt snow for water, they figured out that using metal reflectors, hand-held in the sunlight, created a small trickle of water. They organized a group that would run this process at all times during the day. Even with that, everyone suffered from dehydration because the human body dehydrates 5 times faster at high altitude than at sea level. In the attempt to keep warm during the bone-chilling nights, they made a failing effort to make fires. There was hardly any kindling, and they were forced to use all their paper money, resulting in nearly $7,500 going up in flames. On the 18th day, an avalanche struck the fuselage in the middle of the night. It struck the back of the fuselage, filling it with snow. 8 died, and many nearly suffocated as they were trapped beneath the snow. There were many obstacles presented for the group that had to be solved very fast. If they failed, the consequence would be death. After enduring 62 days of brutal survival, Nando Parado decided it was time to find civilization beyond the peaks on his own. He picked Roberto Canessa as his companion for the rugged trek. They endured a ruthless 10-day trek through the Arctic Andes. Finally, they reached a small hut across a river in Los Metenos. Nando threw a note across to the Chilean shepherd on the other side that read, "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains. I am Uruguayan. In the plane there are still 14 injured people. We don't have any food. We are weak. When are you going to come and fetch us? Please." The shepherd immediately notified the police. After they arrived, Nando and Roberto located the crash site on a terrifying helicopter ride, and the survivors were finally saved on December 22, 1972. In the end, there were only 16 survivors, with 29 dead, and a total of 72 days on the mountain. As the helicopter landed at the crash site, the survivors rejoiced at the arrival of help after waiting for so many weeks. Their fight for survival was finally over.
¿Pudieron sobrevivir ustedes? ¿De qué se alimentaban?
Bueno,
sobre ese tema.
Las que no,
Sí.
pensamos no contestar.
¿Cuántos familiares tienes tú? ¿Tienes más hermanos?
Tenía a mi madre y a mi hermana que lamentablemente fallecieron en el avión y me queda otra hermana.
Looking back on it, Nando states, "I think that we were very lucky because one of the best things that we did is that we were a team before. Had this happened on a commercial airline, things would have been different." His fellow survivors agree with this, and all credit the closeness and teamwork of the group to their willpower to survive. This historical event will forever be remembered as one of the greatest survival stories in history and an incredible journey testing 16 people's critical decision-making and will to survive against pain, hunger, and fear.